And we are on Zoom right now, so hi to our folks who are joining us on Zoom. If for whatever reason you don't want to be on camera, there is a live viewing room next door where the coffee is. You can watch it on the TV in there. So just so you know, you'll all be on camera. For our folks on Zoom, I have the Zoom meeting up over here, so I can see when you throw things in the chat or the Q&A. And just if when we get to Q&A, and there's plenty of room for questions and to hear your housing stories, because that's what I'm really interested in hearing. And we'll just have you come up to the microphone and the camera zooms in on whoever's talking. So just so you know, you'll be up on camera. So I think that's good on housekeeping stuff. You all managed to find the coffee and the whatever pastries we have in the other room this morning. So so this is our 6th annual Greater Seacoast Housing Summit. We've done these events in partnership with the Seacoast Chamber Alliance every year, and we're very, very lucky to continue to work with them to put on this event because they handle the hard part, the logistics of it, and a big thank you to the city of Dover, too, who figured out all of this logistics of the hybrid stuff, so we didn't have to do that. And another big thank you to Cambridge Trust Company. We have lots of Cambridge reps in the audience today. That's the rowdy crowd in the back. Before we start, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan Pope, who's here with Cambridge Trust, to just offer a few words as our presenting sponsor.
Thank you, Sarah. And good morning, everybody. I'm Ryan Pope, and today I have the privilege of representing Cambridge Trust, the Workforce Housing Coalition of the Greater Seacoast and Fairtide. As I'm sure many of you are intimately aware, housing is critical to the overall health and vibrancy of our communities, and affordability remains the primary obstacle that we have to overcome. Cambridge Trust remains committed to the future of our communities and the advancement of affordable housing initiatives through our ongoing partnerships with local nonprofit organizations like NeighborWorks of Southern New Hampshire, the Massachusetts Housing Partnership, and of course, the Workforce Housing Coalition of the Greater Seacoast, as well as through our advocacy and volunteer efforts of our employees, and that's it. That's it. So housing is near and dear to our hearts, and we just want to thank everyone for joining us this morning for this discussion.
Thanks so much, Ryan, and thanks to everyone from Cambridge Trust. We couldn't do this event without you, and Cambridge Trust, formerly Optima Bank and Trust used to be, was a big part of the starting of the coalition. So for those who aren't familiar, the Workforce Housing Coalition of the Greater Seacoast started in the early 2000s. I think our first event was in 2001. I, of course, was not there. But back in 2001, it started as a response to Portsmouth businesses who were concerned about being able to house their workers. And Optima was there from the very beginning, and so was the Sheridan. They were concerned because they had their seasonal employees living on boats in the Piscataqua. And for the record, this is all how I've heard the story, so I can't verify how truthful it really was. But this is what I heard, and I think, living on a boat in Piscataqua for the summer while you're working at the Sheridan sounds lovely, right? But apparently it's not a very sustainable way to operate your business. And so this has, from the very beginning of the Workforce Housing Coalition's history, been a concern for employers, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Is this, and it's only gotten worse in the past couple of years, and what we've heard from employers went from, we're struggling because our employees are having a hard time finding housing, to we're thinking about leaving the state because we cannot find workers here and there's nowhere for people to live. And I've heard businesses say things like, they're losing star employees to places that are more affordable, and that stuff is incredibly challenging. So we wanted to talk today about the role of employers and the impact that that this housing crisis has had on employers. So I'm going to open the conversation this morning with Darren Winham, who is Exeter's Economic Development Director. Darren, I've heard you and others say things along the lines of housing is the #1 issue facing businesses across the region, and that's why we're here today. Will you tell us what you're hearing from employers and how housing is affecting the region's economy?
Yes, and thank you. And I apologize, I'm going to read. I over-prepared, so that's what I do. So what do I hear from employers? I hear the same thing every day. We can't find workers, we can't recruit workers, and oftentimes we can't keep workers. A lot of people think, why don't they just pay more money to their workers? Well, they do, often to the point of going into the red, hoping for better times down the road. One business told me that, quote, if I can't find workers, I don't know if I can stay in New Hampshire. Well, that's from a multinational that has options. Often I hear, I don't know how much longer I can keep my doors open. Without workers to fill orders, I'm losing customers to my competition. The myriad and variety of companies affected by lack of workforce is so widespread on the Seacoast, it's almost total. It's gotten so ridiculous that my fellow panelists once remarked, geez, if we fill our last 4 spots, I may hang a sign in my business that says not hiring, just to be different.
That's the dream.
While there are other mitigating factors, the lack of affordable housing for our region's workforce is the #1 driver for our workforce woes. I was talking to one major employer that spent significant resources recruiting for several positions, had some success with mid-management, but lost out to a director-level employee that they really wanted, as even though the salary was competitive, the housing costs were so out of whack that the candidate turned down the job to live in a state where he could afford to keep more of his money. In that same instance, the company is worried about retaining the 2 mid-managers they did hire, as they're traveling almost an hour to work because that's where they can afford to live. The concern this company has, and I hear it every day from other businesses, is that sooner or later these employees will find a comparable job closer to home. A couple of weeks ago, I was speaking with a few of my economic development colleagues, and we were ruminating about the interconnectivity of workforce, economic development, and housing, and the feedback we would for years hear at meetings when we would bring up the need for our communities to focus on increasing affordable housing stock and how the lack thereof is negatively affecting business growth. And we always heard the same arguments from the same people. Housing isn't your purview. You should be focused on commercial development. Now that it's become very obvious to the general public that you can't have one without the other, the good news is we don't hear that argument anymore. The bad news is we don't hear that argument anymore. So make no mistake, lack of affordable housing, particularly on the Seacoast, is at a crisis point. So let's play the good news, bad news game. The good news is there's jobs, lots and lots and lots of jobs. There's job opportunities everywhere, and they're not centered on one industry. There are opportunities for advancement, opportunities to try out a different career, opportunities to negotiate with employers benefits such as healthcare, childcare, flex time, remote working, you name it, all good stuff. The bad news is we need affordable workforce housing. The question is, how do we get there? Well, this is a solutions-oriented summit, and soon you'll hear from the Randolphs, by the way, from Exeter, on unique projects they are spearheading that speaks to workforce housing solutions. After I'll add a few other possibilities before we turn it over to the audience for questions and hopefully suggestions. But before all that, I'd like to yank a few threads here regarding our crisis. The Josiah Barrett Center for Public Policy in Concord recently released a study that concluded that local land use regulations drive New Hampshire housing shortage. The study cited as examples of local regulations that prevent people from building homes, including multifamily housing, which is what workforce housing could be, include minimum lot sizes, frontages and setbacks, single-family only requirements, bureaucratic requirements for accessory dwelling units, maximum heights and densities, minimum parking requirements, historic and village district requirements, municipal land ownership, subdivision, regulations, impact fees, and simply the unwillingness of zoning boards to issue variances. Fortunately, actually, we don't have that problem. We have a really good ZBA. The study also noted, quote, widely available measures show that New Hampshire is one of the most restrictive states in the country for residential development. By suppressing building, land use regulations drive up the price of housing as demand rises. Removing or relaxing these regulations would allow prices to rise more gradually, unquote. The study also cites the fallacy of increased school children for community resistance of residential development. That's not a quote. They didn't write the word fallacy. I did. I'm just tired of that argument, you know? It's a tired, wrong argument. The study also released a list of the top 10 inelastic regulated New Hampshire communities regarding building and land use regulations. 6 of the top 10 are Seacoast communities, including the top 4. The study offers some unique solutions, which I'll touch on in the second part of the summit. The New Hampshire Council on Housing Stability's 3-year strategic plan, which provides a roadmap to coordinate action and deploy resources to meet the housing needs of New Hampshire's residents, was released into July of this year, and it calls for an increase of housing availability of 13,500 units by 2024. That's right around the corner, 13,500 by 2024. That's going to be a little work. David Choate, Executive Vice President of Collier's International New Hampshire office, in a Seacoast Online article last month, acknowledged lack of affordable housing as the #1 issue when it comes to hiring and retaining workers on the Seacoast. He said a lack of affordable housing for employees is huge. In that article, Mr. Choate pointed out something that we don't even address very much. He said even housing that meets the state definition of workforce is not affordable. In some cases, that's obviously very true. To quote, the problem I have with most developers is they say they've developed workforce housing when it's really under market. If the market was 600,000 and the workforce's unit is 400,000, it's under market, but it's not affordable. In an October 23rd article entitled Tax Structure Key to Affordable Housing in New Hampshire, writer Gary Rayno notes that one of the issues regarding sustainable affordable housing is the misuse of New Hampshire's current use law. Rayno writes, quote, "The current use program began in 1973 with a goal of preserving open space by assessing a property's value of use of the land and not its potential use. Some communities assessed farmland and other large tracts as potential building lots, making it prohibitively expensive for the owners and encouraging them to sell the land to developers. The program sought to preserve the land that helped define a community or prevent paving paradise to put up a parking lot, but as programs evolve, unintended consequences emerge. Today, much of the land in current use is owned by people who could afford to pay higher taxes on it, but that tax burden is shifted to the other property taxpayers in the community. Some communities have more than 50% of their taxable land in current use, and if it's a property-poor community, and many are, tremendous upward pressure is created on the property tax bills of the town's other property owners." I want to talk about that for a second. So in Exeter, as an example, we have a property that is 62 acres. It is on the corner of Route 101 and Route 27. It's about a couple miles from I-95, and the property tax bill on those 62 prime acres was less than $1,000 last year. So think about that. Any developer will just hold that property or any like it in perpetuity to the detriment of the municipality until they get exactly what they want, be it a sale, in which case they'll pass the current use penalty onto the purchaser or develop it for the highest use value or highest value use. Imagine if we amended the current use law to encourage affordable housing on current use sites. It could be a nice carrot. Rick Fabrizio, Director of Communications and Public Policy for the Business and Industrial Association, recently wrote an article in the New Hampshire Business Review entitled, "There's Trouble Ahead If New Hampshire Doesn't Solve the Housing Crisis." I'm going to read this slow because it's really good. In it, Mr. Fabrizio warns, "There may not be a greater long-term threat to New Hampshire's economy than the lack of a diversified housing stock. Employers are struggling to fill open positions and soon it will slow the overall economy. The stagnant supply of lower-cost workforce housing is a chronic issue dating back at least 20 years. It's now showing up in the most pronounced way. Employers can't find workers because workers can't find affordable places to live. They can barely find any place to live. The vacancy rate for apartments is less than 1%. 5% is considered a balanced market, drawing tens of applicants for those that are available and driving up costs." Now that's, Mr. Fabrizio is talking about the state, tens of applicants. It's not tens of applicants for an opening on the Seacoast for a rental unit. It's hundreds of applicants. Another fact, New Hampshire's 2021 rental survey report showed the statewide median gross rent, including utilities, at $1,500 for a two-bedroom unit, up 6% over 2020. It's $1,672 in Rockingham County. I would argue that's even short. So I want to end this segment with something I wrote to one of my colleagues when we were lamenting the fact that we could find so little intermunicipal traction for infrastructure sharing for the creation of workforce housing, taking the share the load approach. This is what I wrote, quote, "The inter-community colloquialism that exists stymies opportunities for cooperation. As examples, Northampton doesn't want infrastructure from Hampton or Portsmouth, and Stratham doesn't want infrastructure from Exeter, even though the voters of Exeter approve the same. The reason is, as a legislator put it last week, paraphrasing here, everyone wants affordable housing, they just don't want it in their community." So, yield my time.
Thanks, Darren. That was great. And I'm guessing that... I'm guessing that for a lot of you, that probably sounded familiar, that your business or someone you know is sort of struggling in the same ways, or maybe you're hearing the same thing from businesses. I know we have a couple chamber folks in the back there, so you're probably hearing something from your chamber members that are really similar to exactly that. The Workforce Housing Coalition has been talking to a lot of employers this year, and we've been working on a video series interviewing employers about the housing crisis and how it's impacting them. And the striking thing, or maybe the not striking thing that we found, is that the stories are pretty much identical. They're having a hard time recruiting and retaining employees. Their employees are driving long distances to get to work, or they're losing these great employees because why drive all the way to, say Portsmouth, for example, to work in a restaurant when you're driving by 4 or 5 restaurants in Rochester and Dover, and you can afford to live in Farmington. So certainly it's been a challenge for a lot of employers, and of course it's not just about business for any of them. Everyone that we've talked to has talked about their aging parents or their friends or themselves and their own housing story, or their grown kids and they worry about where their kids are going to live. We talked to the owner of Las Olas, and that was one of the things that he brought up. He's got 2 kids who are in their teens, and what happens when they're grown up? Are they going to be able to live near here? So I'm really excited to turn it over to John and Maggie Randolph, who are with Harmony Homes and GSD Studios. They're a local employer who can speak not just to the issue and how it impacted them, but also begin to speak to the solution and what they've done to start to address this issue for them. So I'm going to turn it over to John and Maggie.
Good morning. I want to tell you, Maggie and I started our day, and by way, Darren, I'm not any as well as prepared as you are. That was amazing. I'm still in awe. I need a copy of that and everything else and stuff. Maggie and I started our day much like we usually do, swinging by the Newfields Country Store for a coffee. One of the owners is there and asked us, "What are you doing today?" And he asked that because we don't have any paint on us or any dust on us and everything. Almost every morning when we go there, we're on our way to paint something or fix something or whatever else and stuff. And I said, "Well, we're on our way to speak at the Dover Housing Summit or the Housing Summit," and he goes, "Is that when you go with Moses to the top of the hill and get the 10 Commandments on housing?" So I'm not as funny as you are, Darren, but that was the start of the day. And I shared a story with Doug that we'll share before we leave, that we have to have some sense of humor in this housing market and everything that's going on and stuff. But they asked us to come and talk a little bit about where we were, where we are, and where we want to go. Harmony Homes started in Durham, in Michael's neck of the woods over there, back almost 10 years ago. Myself, my partner, and one employee. We opened our second location in 2017 in Durham. Are up to about 80 employees, and our goal is to get to over 200 employees in the next 5 years and open several more locations. And along the way, we've decided to start our own construction company, and now have typically on a given day about 8 of us that are working on building and everything else. So we probably have a total of about 90 employees on a given day. And so about 3 years ago, one of my directors called me when I was visiting a university with my youngest son and said, "We just can't find staff. Like, no matter what we're doing, we can't find staff." And we had opened our location about 6 months earlier, and I said, "Well, let's look at what we can do." And over the next year, we did 21% benefit increases. So we gave raises and benefit increases. We jumped up on what percentage of benefits we were paying. We gave significant raises. But the other side of that, and you brought it up, Darren, we got a lot of feedback. We'll just give bigger and bigger raises. We're also trying to keep assisted living affordable for the seniors that live in our homes. You know, the other side of that is there's a cap on what certain people can spend, no matter what your business is, whether it's repairing a car or childcare or anything else. You can't raise childcare prices to pay your employees more. It just doesn't work that way. There's a barrier at some point. If we want to keep housing, ironically, for our seniors affordable, we can't just give endless raises. And so we kind of sat down and started to listen, and we started to hear the horror stories that many of you have heard. I live in Farmington now and drive to South Berwick, Maine to drop my kids off with my parents, and then I drive to Durham and work an 8, 10, 12-hour day, and then I reverse that. And so your kids are getting a 12 to 14-hour day. What happens if one of your children is sick that day? What happens if your parents are sick that day? What happens, there's just so many problems with that, which leads to not having the staff that you need that given day. And then that puts seniors at risk. All these factors have gone on, and we started just, why are you living in Farmington? Why don't you live in Newmarket or Durham or Dover? Well, we can't find a place, or when we do, it's certainly not affordable. And so we started to kind of kick around different ideas. And then we went to the town of Durham and sat down with Michael and his team and just said, "Hey, we got permission to build this duplex on our property. We want to turn it into housing for our staff." And we certainly appreciate, Michael, your team of being understanding and working with us to turn that into what we turned in today. And Maggie designed a great building. She's going to talk to you a little bit about it. We built it this last year, and we had staff lined up, and we're full, and stuff like that. That filled 7 beds, within a couple of weeks. We had staff move in, and we rent that building at 30% of their pay. So we have people living in there at $630. If any of you have been by the building, you cannot get another rent for $630 anywhere, but never mind on the Oyster River with the view it has and everything else. It's absolutely awesome. We have a single mom living in there. We're getting ready to open our own childcare in the building, and she'll save nearly $1,000 a month in our childcare and in one of our apartments. And so that's the kind of stories that we had to kind of pursue in order to be competitive in the market, to keep our prices relatively, affordable for our seniors, but give, our staff a good quality of life. And that's what you're going to confront as you grow your business. The staff wants a quality of life, and driving from Farmington to South Berwick to Durham and reversing that is not a quality of life. And so I'm going to let Maggie take over now. We're going to also talk about the Dover project. We have a project coming in Dover that we're looking to break ground on shortly, but you've got some pictures and some stuff to show us on Dover and Durham, and walk us through that.
Sure. If you're seeing the first, I wanted to show you an outside shot of Harmony Place, and that's the apartment building that we built on the campus of Harmony Homes by the Bay, and so that's Route 4 in Durham. We're very excited for it. We were so pleased to work with the town of Durham, and they worked with us on the density allotment in that zone. So we talk a lot about zoning and a lot of the issues that really come into this. So they allowed us to work with the selection so that we could have up to 7 one-bedroom apartments. We have a child care space going in, and we have office space for staff as well. So I took the picture yesterday. I was really excited because I feel like all the fall leaves are there and everything. But if you go to the second section, you can see, the floor plan. This is a very simple model. But you can start to see where it's located. Not a bad commute there. It's about, 600 feet. Great views. You're right on the water. And you could see, the floor plan there where they are very, simple one-bedroom apartments. And, we really pared it down to be as efficient, but also keep it as quality as we could. Because, again, not only in the assisted living itself, but whatever we do housing-wise, we really feel that dignity. We all deserve to live with dignity, no matter where we are. So we have approved up to 7 apartments there, and they're full. And it's a drop in the bucket. So we've turned our attention and have started thinking about what else can we do in the area. I don't know if you want to talk about.
I wanted to add to that. I said that we charge 30%. We also have a part-time program that if someone works 16 hours a week with us, then it basically is a break even for them. So we have 1 or 2 UNH or grade Bay students that are part-time employees with us, and that meets the requirement of Durham for them to be employees with us. But Great Bay has no housing, for example, and so it's very tough for students to be going to Great Bay and everything else. So they work 2 8-hour shifts with us. They get paid for those 8 hours, but that essentially is equivalent to their cost, and so it keeps them from trying to accumulate more debt going through college or whatever else. And it's a great program for us. The students are doing a great job, and they're fitting in very well.
And the great part is it's working. We've had people move from other states to be with us. They're now employed here. So it's not just our current employees, though we've housed them as well. So, but it's working on all levels, and that's so exciting to us.
Yep. And we've talked to a lot of employers in the area that said we've recruited people to come here, but when they start to look for housing, they turn the job down. Dartmouth Hitchcock, we've talked to their HR, and they have over 500 openings, and they're talking about, they are asking us, would you want to come up and build a tiny home complex or something for us? But they're offering nurses ridiculous money to go, and they can't find housing. And so we're finding people from outside the state that are interested in coming here, but they're just not finding housing. And so that led us to come talk to Chris Parker. Chris Parker's certainly a very progressive, mind and everything else, and we've known Chris for a long time. And we sat down with kind of a vision of what we'd like to do, and we went and looked at. We bought 54 Back River Road, and put it's about 8 acres. We've put about half of it into conservation. And then we've put a plan together to build 44 tiny homes, about 384 square feet apiece. We developed that concept by talking to a lot of our staff and asking them what they're looking for, and there's a lot of great things about having huge apartment complexes, but the individual housing units were very attractive to them going through COVID. there's a separation. You're not walking down the hall with 22 other people, and all those sort of things. But we really wanted to present them another quality of life factor and everything. So we came up with a model, and Maggie will kind of talk to you about the research of it. But it's been about an 18-month process to get to the point where we're really, really close to breaking ground. And if I can fit my tall tale in real quickly, I told Doug earlier this tall tale, and he scratched his head. But so we're all the way through. We needed an AOT permit. We've gone through everything with Dover. We're all ready to break ground, and we get a phone call that the state has said that you now have to. Wildlife and Fish and Game has to review every AOT permit and everything, and so we didn't panic. We'd already had a wildlife expert out there and said you don't have any things, and so our report was in saying there was no wildlife of any concern there. And then they came back and there was a sighting of a New England cottontail 1.2 miles away. And there's a zone of 1 mile that you have to investigate whether you also have New England cottontails. So the Fish and Game had determined that's too close to the 1 mile, and so they were going to ask us to go beyond our wildlife report and take the next level. And the next level is to wait for snow, and then 48 hours after snow, we go looking for scat. And if you don't know what scat is, Google scat and stuff,
or
but
Yeah, we're going. Right.
or don't. All right. After you find any scat, whether it's from a potential raccoon or anything else, it has to go to UNH. It gets DNA'd, and they determine what type of rabbits you have. So I asked the question to the state: does that mean from now on all AOT permits will be issued after the first snow, which means every builder is going to have to wait until December or January or February to break ground, which is absolutely the worst time of the year to break ground. And they said, well, we're going to kind of cross that bridge when we get there. That was the answer that we got. We did call, and the system did, within parameters, work. They have sent an environmental tech out to our location, found absolutely no evidence of rabbits, so we're waiting to hear if our AOT has got final approval. But I bring these things up because I'm not saying it in any kind of way other than just honesty. We have, between design, between everything else, have over $300,000 into the project. Every month that goes by is another $12,000 to $15,000 in carrying costs that goes on. This is a zero-sum process for us, meaning we will not get a 10% return on our $300,000 at any point soon. This is about us building our business or bringing affordable housing to the area. Contractors are not going to come in, builders and developers are not going to come in and put $300,000 to $500,000 on the table for the potential to lose money for the foreseeable future. It has to be tied to the growth of business or growth of something else. But if you're going to have roadblocks like this, it really just doesn't make sense. I'm sorry, it makes a lot more sense for me to build 12 $600,000 houses there and sell 1,200 $600,000 houses there and stuff. And so that's really, those are the obstacles that we're unfortunately continuing to go through and work through and everything. But I see we do have the back screen up and everything, so I don't know if you're going to get pictures of the project up, but I'm going to let Maggie jump in and talk about the design and what's going on there.
Well, so I think what John is saying as well is that, no matter what, when you think about what a business goes through and, in order to kind of put their neck out there, but it's an option. Do I dare ask?
Yeah, there we go. We're back.
No one needs to see me. Let's see the pretty pictures. But it takes perseverance to get here. So the plan that we put forth for 54 Back River Road is a series of pocket neighborhoods with cottages. Now we call them cottages because though they are under the square footage of what is considered a tiny home, these are 384 foot footprint, that these are on slabs. So that's the differentiation, because anybody who watches HGTV has this idea that you can put it on a trailer and tow it up behind and go see, the Rocky Mountains or something, which is so cool. However, not what we're going for here. We want people to come to the state and stay and work and then grow their families and put down roots here. So that's where we come to with Dover. These are, but we listen to people, and what do they want? It's we talk to our 18, 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds, kids, the sons that we have that we don't want living in our basement anymore. you know, they they don't always want to drive. They want to be able to, to be with people and have that interactive experience, but they also want to retreat and have their own space as well, which I totally understand. The interesting thing too is that when we talk to, that age group, and we realized that, a lot of the 55 and over as well, starting to empty nest and stuff, they go, I want that too. So I have an urban design background, and Michael and I have talked about this for a long time, about just the idea of smart growth and walkability and, what makes a neighborhood, and what we really kind of crave as human beings. We like our little cave, to retreat to, but we're also very much pack animals, and so we crave that interaction. So we talked with Sarah, and we talked with a bunch of, like I said, our staff, and we looked at this model of pocket neighborhoods, and they have been very successful out west. It's actually an incredibly old typology before, suburbia kind of came in, right around World War II, if you're up with Levittown there. So it's older than that, and it's this idea that your house is clustered around a common green. And so that way, George, I can see you in your unit, and you're living in there, and, we have, I know it's safe. I can let my kids out because I know George, I know Michael, I know Doug, and I know that everybody is safe here, but we have this community, but then we can retreat. And I love this idea of being able to, make this green space in the middle, whatever you want it to be as a cluster. And so it's very much about, public space in the center, and then these ideas of boundary and going from semi-private to private space. So this is how we work to set these up. And so we're very excited to have the young or whomever wants to live here. It's not restricted at all by age. But we've got 44 that were planned, and we're excited to break ground.
And what we'd like to do is continue to partner with businesses in the area. The only flaw I find in your math and all this, Darren, is that we're shooting to solve today's problem, but by the time we get our engines going, we should be looking 5 years down the road. And if you look at today's problem, might be 18,000, 20,000 units, but the problem 5 years down the road is probably more like 30 or 40,000 units. We're not going to build 30 or 40,000 units and everything else, but we'd love to partner with other small companies. The concept of someone coming in and kind of pre-leasing 5 units and saying, these are going to be for 6 hours or whatever company out there and stuff like that, and they can't pass it along as a profit, but they could pass it along as a benefit, would allow us to potentially grow our model even quicker and stuff. And so we're not going to get anywhere near 20,000 units by that, but I think the model works, and I think it's something that we need to retain and attract young men and women when they're coming out of college or out of high school, and keep them here long term. When we can go out and attract people here, but our own children staying in the area. The funny part about the Dover project is we went literally driveway by driveway to our neighbors and held little mini meetings in the driveways and talked about, because they came out and said not in our backyard. So we went and kind of campaigned through the neighborhood and just said, hey, here's who we are, here's what we believe in. I think we got 5 to 7 reservations out of those from family members going, can I book one for my son? Can I book one for my daughter? And everything else and stuff. So even though there's still some people that say, what's this going to look like? These are our goal. Really, this is the focused on people that are making 40,000 and less in our state. That's the group of people, if you think about it. That's who's looking for affordable housing. That's our some of our grade school teachers, are people that repair our cars, the people that work in our schools, work in our police forces, work in our firefighters, all those things. This isn't people that are waiting for a check at the end of the month. These are people that are trying to be part of our community, trying to take care of our kids, take care of our seniors, take care of our schools, or maintain our roads, that just need an affordable place to live in the town that they work in, or live in the area that they work in.
Yeah. So if I can bring back the slides for a second, or maybe not the slides, but we actually have an animation that if you care to take a little dive into the into the project.
You have the Dover picture, Durham pictures also, right?
We showed those.
Okay,
yep.
They went through.
Melissa's got to work her
I can
magic.
see it on Zoom, but it's not up there yet.
The Zoom people can see it, but
Perfect.
we can't have it on the TV.
Oh,
so you're
bummer.
flying
All right.
through. You're flying through, everybody.
Well, it's very cool. You'll just have to take my word for it.
Now imagine you're flying down a road into
So we got a couple really specific questions for the both of you that came in via Zoom. Someone was wondering, one, if you would clarify the cost to the folks that are going to be. It's actually they're going to be rentals, right? So the cost to the folks that are going to be renting these cottages. I think you talked a little bit about the size. He was wondering about the square footage too, and if you considered making them 2 stories or doubling the number of units in some way, shape, or form.
Well, I can speak to one thing. We would love to. We'd love to do more of these. Dover is a beginning for us, and we'd love to be able to move on to others. It's a test run, and we'd love to be able to show that these can be high quality places to live. Now we were so fortunate to work with the city of Dover, and they really worked with us on the zoning and the density, and I can't stress that enough of how important that is. So with that said, we did have restraints in the site regarding parking. And so we have kept these at 1-bedroom units, all of them. They do have a little loft for storage, so the storage units in the area won't be completely overrun. But coming from a dorm room, that 384 square feet is more than enough in some ways. But in future projects, Darren, we would love to do, to do 2 stories. We'd love to do 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom, or the possibility of being able to drive your car up behind your unit and still maintain a common green in the middle. So we've had a lot of interesting design points with this one, and we're learning, and we'd love to grow further.
Yeah, we definitely want to get into 2- and 3-bedroom models. The Dover location, based on putting land into conservation, parking restraints were all part of that. I think a part of that question also, Sarah, was what they'd be paying for our employees. Well, let me put it. We agreed with the town of City of Dover to keep it under HUD and everything else. So that was part of the project also. So I think we did 100% of the units are under HUD. So we didn't
Completely.
do and then. For our employees, we'll continue our 30% policy, which, a goal of housing being at 30%. If you look at where people are, it's well above 30% in our area. So that's where we're going to keep our employees. The other things that we try to tie into this on affordability and everything else is we'll probably planning to keep a Harmony Homes van there. So if we have 6 to 10 employees coming in for first or second or third shift, they come in together. Ride share, those sort of programs and everything else are also super important. We're hoping in later phases to look at better use of solar, geothermal, those sort of things to kind of make these, zero emissions or zero outside energy input homes as well. They're super efficient once you insulate them properly, and heating them is extremely easy. Maintaining them is very easy. And the other thing to keep in mind, a lot of people go 380 square feet, that's not much. You're moving from a dorm room where 2 of you are sharing 180 square feet, it's huge. You're out buying furniture to move into this, or you're living with your parents and you're moving out, or you're downsizing on the other end, and we're finding that that's actually a fairly reasonable amount of space. And the other benefit is Appendix Q, I think just recently got approved by the state, which allows for use of loft space and everything. So technically you can use that loft space and everything else.
Yep.
Am I misspeak on that?
No.
Okay, she's smarter than I am, way smarter, so, on all that stuff and everything. So we answer all the questions?
Yeah, and I want to go back to, I love that you mentioned wages at the beginning, and because this is a question that comes up a lot, is what if we just increase wages? And certainly there are some wage-related issues in New Hampshire when you look at other states and how we haven't generally kept up with inflation. But one of the things you mentioned was giving raises, and it still didn't help. And I think the reality of this housing market right now is that even if you can afford the housing that we have, there isn't any. So you're going to struggle to find some, and that's why we hear things like from Dartmouth Hitchcock having a hard time employing doctors, because these are people who are making significant wages, but if there's nowhere for them to live, that doesn't do us a lot of good. And there was a report that came out from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. They release their out of reach report every summer that said that in New Hampshire, in order to afford sort of a modest unit, and they calculated that at, I think, $12.86, that you need to be making $24.73 an hour, and that's, of course, well above our minimum wage and sort of well above our median incomes for a lot of folks. Darren, I'm going to turn it back to you because this is amazing, and I think it speaks to the I don't want to say the level of desperation, but where this crisis has gotten for businesses, where we have businesses who are not housing developers necessarily, who are talking about building housing because they need housing for their workers. And if the developer's not going to do it, if the municipality's not going to allow it, they're going to try to make it happen themselves. But I also appreciate and recognize that not all employers are necessarily going to get into the business of being landlords or, buying housing or building housing for their workers. So what else can an employer do to be part of solving the region's housing crisis? And what about the state and municipalities? What can we do?
Thanks for asking. I'm prepared for it. But
He told me
when
to
I'm done,
ask
though, I
it.
do want to go back and talk to Maggie and John about what Dover did exactly and how they interpret their rules, because I think there's a lesson there. Because what you folks are doing is something, it's very unique. The fact that you have your own crew, because you can keep your costs down. The fact that you're willing to partner with employers, but if other communities looked at what Dover did and said, okay, did they interpret things differently? How'd they do it, and how can we do it to do the same thing to get you guys to come in and build that type of housing for other companies that need it so badly? So I had mentioned the Josiah Bartlett Center for Public Policy in Concord and their study. So this was the conclusions they came up with. They said at the local level, zoning ordinances could be revised to allow homes to be built on smaller lot sizes with smaller frontages, with smaller setbacks. Building permit caps could be removed. Multifamily housing options such as duplexes and triplexes could be allowed in additional locations. In urban areas, minimum parking and maximum height restrictions could be eased. At the state level, the state could enact a regulatory takings compensation law so that municipal governments would have to compensate landowners for new regulations that substantially take away the value of their property. The state could directly preempt the most egregious forms of exclusionary zoning, such as minimum lot sizes above a certain level and building permit caps. The state could also authorize towns to decentralize planning authority to neighborhood or even block levels. At such a small level, residents are unlikely to adopt rent-seeking forms of zoning because builders and home buyers could easily go elsewhere. State government could authorize municipal land use compacts that would allow neighboring municipalities to offer multi-community planning where the impacts of regulation on the whole commuting area could be considered. That's a pretty smart idea. Dover, as progressive as they are and have done with the things they've done, they're also now, my colleague Dan Barafaldi here, the godfather of economic development. So he was telling us that he has some developers that are actually looking at buying or building an apartment building to house workers using only the cost of purchase, mortgage, insurance, and maintenance. In other words, only charging their costs, not carving in any immediate profit. The building would appreciate over time and give the value to the owners, but they can then thus provide housing at affordable rates for their workers. John and Maggie had mentioned rent guarantees. We're looking at that in Exeter right now, where business owners enter into rent guarantees for a certain number of units with developers that are building all or partially affordable projects. In other words, you could have a 100-unit multifamily building, and SIG could say, look, I'll take 5 of those. Cobham could say, I'll take 5 of those. The rent's guaranteed. It's coming from the businesses, and the businesses could use that to recruit employees. Exeter has what's called the Mixed-Use Neighborhood Development, or the MUND, which is we allow mixed-use buildings in central zones where 10% of the if you put 10% of the units into workforce housing, you get increased height, increased density, decreased setbacks, parking unit requirements that are very favorable, and of course other incentives. There is legislation that just passed called the Housing Opportunity Zones. That's enabling legislation that allows no less than 1/3 of the housing units constructed shall be designated for households with an income of 80% or less than the area median income, and that's just like the 79E. In other words, the town will designate an area for housing opportunity zones, and then if someone goes in there and builds this type of housing where they have it 1/3 of the housing shall be an 80%, then they can fix the taxes for what they are before the pre-investment taxes. So if it's a building they're retrofitting, it's taxed X, or if it's a virgin piece of property, it's tax X. And depending on how the town decides to enable legislation, they can go for up to 10 years if someone does put the workforce housing in there, and they can fix those taxes. It's a pretty good incentive. Rye which is pretty progressive as well, the Rye Planning Board is looking at a bunch of new pro-workforce housing regulations. The one that jumps most for me is moving from the required 20% workforce housing in any multifamily development to 30%. It's true. They're also looking at redefining multifamily, ready, from 5 units, from now as 5 as opposed to 8, so less units. So they less units to make workforce housing, multifamily housing, which is good. And the last one is Exeter is looking at right now. We're calling it a de facto workforce housing. As you know, when regulations keep changing, and legislators never agree. We have this workforce opportunity zones, so that's a good thing. There's a lot more legislation that's tabled. One of the big issues with legislation is administration of it. We had one slip through our fingers in workforce housing, slip through our fingers in Exeter, and the person had been renting it. Now he's the CEO of a company in New York City, been renting it for workforce housing as an investment property for about 20 years. And so there's administrative issues. So what we thought was, not we, Dave Sharples, our town planner, thought, well, what if we allow multifamily housing in an area of town that is commercial, that doesn't allow multifamily housing, but it does have all the infrastructure needed, but we will limit the unit size, whether it's 380, whether it's 400, whether it's 500, but it'll be de facto workforce housing. In other words, you don't put any caveats on it. You just say simply, you can't build any larger units than this, and that will keep the cost down. Again, yield my time. That's all I have.
Can I jump in here for a second?
Absolutely.
You talk about how we were able to work this through with Dover. It wasn't actually an interpretation of anything on our part. Dover did the work. Dover has a TDR program in which their program is that you can buy density, and I think it's an incredibly progressive idea. But if you agree to restrict your units to under 600 square feet, and if you agree to maintain under HUD levels of rental, then they waive that fee. So this is sorry, I'm getting pushback now. This is a really important idea. And I think the idea of density often scares people because they say, oh my gosh, you're going to get so many people in this little area. But if you think about it too, it's actually an incredibly sustainable way of addressing the needs in our state, because by building more densely in areas, whether it's large scale buildings downtown or areas like ours in more single family residential zones, we are maintaining green space in other areas of the state. It's not a sprawl. So it's very sustainable in this way. So that's the program that they had, and I think that working through the zoning is incredibly progressive in Dover.
Yeah.
In both of our most recent projects, we put 11 acres in conservation in Durham, and we put 4 acres in conservation in Dover. So
the hairs have to go somewhere.
Yeah, we have to rabbit condos are our next project, and everything. But it's still, we can be dense, but not make it overcome and everything else. We can still leave green space in our state to enjoy.
And you're on water and sewer for the Dover project?
Yes.
Do you think there's any chance that a project of that size could be done with like a community well and a couple? In other words, I'm thinking about communities that maybe do want to do workforce housing that don't have the water and sewer.
It could be. I referenced Mike Siebert and everything else. He always finds clever ways to do these things and everything else. I mean, we're going to have to think outside the box. We've actually had churches get a hold of us asking if we'd put them on, their land. Businesses. We had an IT professional from Boston come up and ask. He would like to bring people out of Boston up here to have an IT, and everybody that lives there would be part of their company and everything else. The land is the only limitation to this. It really, across the board, if you want to grow our state as far as young men and women, the use of our land is the only limitation. And as a developer, if the math works. If you tell me I can only have 12 housing lots on this property on 54 Back River Road, I do the math on what it costs to build, and I come up with $600,000 to build those 12 homes to make some sort of profit or break even. That's what you're going to build and sell if they're going to. If you allow for flexibility in it and everything else, and see the investment as a business owner in the growth of your business versus the growth of that individual real estate entity, like you said, it'll come back to you. You're going to pay that property off in time. Yep. So if you're not making a big return right now, that property is going to pay itself. I mean, one of the challenges of this that we're working through is I'm now the employer of some people and also the landlord of some people. And so, what happens if someone, we've had people come to us and go, well, you're doing indentured servitude. And we're like, no, we're not doing indentured servitude. Someone can give 1 month notice and move out of our, apartments and everything else and stuff, and move out of our employee and stuff. So there is challenges as a business owner. If you now have 100 employees living underneath your properties, you're going to have challenges, but we separate that by having a separate property manager, having separate entities for them and everything. So there's still challenges to it. And there's a number of ways, though. You brought up some great ways for businesses to get involved without becoming a landlord.
Yep. Yeah, and I want to highlight the sort of importance of employers and businesses as advocates, because I can go to Concord and testify on behalf of a piece of legislation or against a piece of legislation, depending, or I can go to the planning board and I can speak to them during public comments or at a public hearing, or I can go and speak on behalf of a zoning ordinance amendment. But it's so much more compelling and powerful when it comes from you than when it comes from me. When I show up in Portsmouth at the planning board, they think, oh, it's Sarah, it's the Workforce Housing Coalition. We know what she's going to say. But when a local employer shows up and says, here's what we're struggling with, and tells their own housing story, that's really powerful. So your role as advocates, both, from the business community, but also as humans, because housing is something that touches every single one of us, and you all have a housing story, whether you sort of recognize it or not as a housing story that's powerful and meaningful. It absolutely is. So we want to hear from you. And we have plenty of time for your questions, but we also want to hear from you what your housing stories are and what you're hearing, and what from today's presentation jumped out at you as something that you could do or something that you can relate to, because boy, your business is experiencing the same sort of issues. We just ask you come up to the microphone so the folks on Zoom can hear you. And to the folks on Zoom, feel free to put your housing stories and your thoughts in the comments. I'm trying to follow along there. We'll start. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
All right, Dougie.
Come on, Doug.
Doug Eastman, I'm with the town of Exeter, Darren's associate.
And chauffeur, I heard.
And chauffeur. Yeah, I just have a question about, we're talking about rentals. What about ownership, home ownership? I mean, as a young person starting out, a goal in life is to own something. Is that something that would happen eventually with these units? Could someone turn it into a condo association and then sell them off individually, or is there a restriction that they have to be rentals in perpetuity or for so many years? So that's my question. Thank you.
So, Doug, great question, and I'm sorry you're associated with Darren. But that's a whole different story.
You are too, man.
A couple things went into that. One, with Dover, we agreed that we'd keep it one unit so that they would come to me if things were not the way they expected or whatever else. And Maggie can speak to this more. One of our concerns was, so we sell it the first time a unit at $90,000. That person sells it for $120,000, that person sells it for $360,000. It's no longer affordable. It spirals out of control. Believe it or not, the research on these nationally is even as small as they are. I saw a house for sale somewhere in Massachusetts, 450 square feet, $680,000. Okay, so the size, is not limiting. What we are facing, and I have two college-age children. One went to South Carolina, the other one went to North Carolina. When I ask them why they leave the state, it's warmer down there, whatever. They give you every reason. They're kind of working their way back up. My oldest has gone to UMass now, so he's working his way north again. But we want young men and women to stay in the state so they can become homeowners. When people came out against the Dover project, I said, these people are the people that are going to buy your house. They're the next generation of homeowners. So coming straight out of UNH, it's not likely that at 21 or 22 or 23 they're going to buy a home. Certainly coming out of high school, they're not likely to. But I think that because of the project and trying to keep it sustainably affordable, we kind of had to lock into that model and everything else. What we're hoping for, and what I certainly try to teach our sons is, save, invest, spend the least amount you can as a young man and woman going through college, going through your stuff so that you can buy a house at the appropriate time and everything else. So we're not looking at the 18 to 25 to instantly become homeowners, but for that next generation of homeowners to stay in the state. And that was really our goal in Dover, was to give them someplace to live and work that's affordable, balancing off in many times great school debt or other challenges. So that's why the Dover project, we'd certainly have considered doing that, but we are concerned about the long-term spiraling out of affordability again.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. There was sort of a similar question from the attendees on Zoom that these housing communities, basically, why not sell these properties with a covenant or a deed restriction capping their resale value to keep the housing market attainable for everyone versus renting them to your employees? And I think you've sort of spoken to that. But if you want to talk a little bit about your decision to have them as rentals, then that.
I think this was a little bit more location dependent and everything else and stuff, because we wanted to be somewhere close to public transportation. We wanted to be close to water and sewer. We had certainly density issues. There's other factors. We're also, certainly every time we go to these things, Maggie and I walk away with 3 or 5 great ideas to evolve our thought pattern into making it a better product. And we're certainly hoping Dover's the first, not our last project. We're certainly not opposed to selling them or whatever else afterwards. But if we look at our problem tends to be in someone deciding to stay in the state once they graduate high school, once they graduate college. If they choose to go to college in our state, the likelihood that they'll stay a little bit longer is possible. But if you have to compare what you can make in Boston, what you can make here versus what you're spending on housing versus what you're spending on housing, we're going to drive people out of the state. So the first step is getting people just to stay in state so that they can become, homeowners in our state. If they leave at 18 or 25, the likelihood of them coming back greatly decreases and everything. So we're certainly open to it, but it's really the parameters of how much you buy the land for, how much you build the homes for, what can you sell these homes for, becomes a challenge also and stuff. So.
Yeah. Other questions, takeaways, housing stories from folks who are here in the room? Yeah, come on up.
Hi, I'm Sharon. I'm from Infinity Peer Support, and we deal with a lot of people who are homeless and can't find housing, and they're also lucky if they get Social Security supplemental or Social Security disability. So this is like a 2-part question. And then the other part of the question is there any opportunity in the zoning ordinances for like a village concept? So you have, you referred to mixed use, so I wasn't sure if that's a potential. And that's it.
So you got to answer that question sitting right over there. That's Doug. You want to take that, Doug, with the zoning question? About another opportunity for like clusters and what have you? Because it's going to be different each community, the zoning, of course.
Yeah, I can only speak for what we do in Exeter. We do have mixed use in Exeter, obviously, and it's density. I think we're pretty good on density. Like in our downtown, it's like 750 square feet of lot area per unit. So it's we have it in Exeter. I think we do really well. We have conversions of single-family homes throughout the town. In a residential zone, you can take a single-family home and convert it into a 4-unit and provide more housing on that end. So, yeah, and it's there. We don't see a lot of it. Maybe 1 or 2 a year come in and try to convert those. They're usually larger homes, older homes. You don't see it in the smaller subdivisions, but yeah, I think mixed use is great. Darren and I talk about it all the time. We're always trying to find some place where we can do something like that, or just do total, in a commercial zone, do total residential. So, yeah, Darren and I work on it all the time.
Yep.
With the help
It's an
of
ongoing
Maggie and
process.
John and everybody else, we'll get there.
If I can jump on the end of what Doug was saying, though, there's a trickle-down effect that's going on right now. If you can't afford a $600,000 home, you're looking for something less, and that goes all the way down through. And your example of how many applications, we put a 1-bedroom in Newmarket out for $850 a while ago, and I got over 100 applications with people making over $100,000 asking for the place. I mean, I was blown away. We were
Within an hour.
Within an hour. It was ridiculous. Never mind, we have a duplex in Exeter. I put a 3-bedroom out for $1,500. I had people coming to my door trying to pay 6 months worth of rent ahead of time and stuff. It's ridiculous. But the trickle down, if anyone knows Will Arvello, who just took over Crossroads, a great man. We had breakfast with him recently, talked to him. We've been on the phone with the Manchester VA. They've got veterans that they can't put anywhere. They're asking, hey, can we lease some of these units? Can we? So it is not only affordable housing, but it's the homeless on the other side of that is staggering. And we've been, like I said, been on the phone with the Manchester VA. They're looking for any bed that they can put a homeless individual into right now. And because of that trickle-down effect of what was affordable is no longer there. The $600, $700 apartment is completely gone.
Yep.
And everything else. And the people that could afford that are either becoming homeless or moving out of state or whatever. So the homeless issue, we didn't even really address that in the summit, but it's also driving how can that person go to work if they don't have a home? And so you got people out there that could be in our workforce that can't even afford a home.
That 13,500, that figure was driven. That figure was driven as part of the homeless issue as well. So that they figure if they can create 13,500 by 2024, and like you pointed out, we need to look way beyond that. But that, according to that agency, that will solve there will be a bed for everybody.
Yep.
And
That's
we
what
all
they're saying.
and we all know that COVID and everything has exacerbated these circumstances, that, in the way our economy and how it's working and how we're outstripping in some areas and not in others and not keeping up. If you're one paycheck away and something happens and all of a sudden you're out of your home and you can't find another place that's affordable, you were already out of the bounds of affordability. So we're creating this, this thing where we're losing more people to homelessness, and we'd love to be able to have the opportunity to have something that they can get their feet under them again and become something that's more affordable and re-enter, as so many do, as you know. So.
Yep, absolutely. There's a couple questions on Zoom. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
Oh, Michael.
So, I think obviously this is all about indentured servitude and
Obviously.
lining your pockets. So,
You got it, Michael. You got it.
no good deed goes unpunished is my motto. The pocket neighborhood strategy is really remarkable. It's not for everybody because they're small units, 300, 400 square feet. They're single buildings, they're dense, they're in a sort of neighborhood. So, it's not there's gonna be people it doesn't work for, obviously a family, people who really need a lot of privacy, may not be comfortable with the community sense of it. But it obviously will work really well for many people, singles, one parent with a child, and probably a lot of couples, young couples and old couples. And I think it's really an outstanding model that we need to talk about more. As we talk about with a coalition, there's so many strategies for building housing. There's infill. There's the missing middle that we're trying to create: duplexes, triplexes, triple deckers, row houses. But there's real challenges with some of the other strategies because building infill, even if it's a few units, in a neighborhood or even in a downtown, there's a lot of challenges, as we know. You have more NIMBYism, you have old utilities, you have parking issues. Just you're building within a very tight framework, so it's difficult. And another very important model of building big apartments, in sort of suburban areas, is a way to create a lot of housing. But unfortunately, the way a lot of developers know how to do it, they're apartment builders. And they're big and they're ugly and they're surrounded by parking and they're awful. And so rightfully, you're going to get a lot of NIMBYs around that fight it. So there's another model, I don't mean to go on a lot here, but that Maggie and I have talked about, and it's the new urbanist model that probably many people know about, which is a paradigm in the country that's fabulous, that you can have density, mixed use, walkability, but it's very hard to do. It takes tremendous talent, a great developer, a great architect. There's not a lot of models. So, my point is that the pocket neighborhood is a fantastic model because what we do have is we have a lot of open space in suburban and rural areas. And a good pocket neighborhood is going to fit in well. It's low-key. It's nicely designed with a green and beautiful bungalows and a sense of community. You can surround it with open space. And so, just as you did in Dover, I think there's real opportunities to fit these in many, many locations in New Hampshire. And I think by you doing this, you know, maybe this wasn't super profitable because the first time, but I imagine that you and others will be able to use this model and do it all over the state, and it'll be a template. And so this could be quite profitable, and it could be something that is easier to build and get approved in many communities all over New Hampshire. So the advantage of the pocket neighborhood, it's a sense of community. These are small. You know, one way to build affordable housing is 400 square feet units. You know, we don't have to build 1,000 square foot units. And so anyway, what I'm hoping will happen is this will scale up. You and others will look at this template. Once this is built in Dover, we are going to have field trips all the time to see all over New Hampshire. We've got a model in Dover. They're debating it in Claremont. Go to Dover, and their planning board is going to do a field trip. And they're going to say, see, this is what we want in Claremont, and we'll write a new ordinance and we'll allow it. And there's a lot of ways, obviously, it'll be easy for communities to write ordinances. With a simple couple things, maybe conditional use, special exception, PUD, or by right, if you have these parameters. Anyway, so field trips, the state should pass some enabling legislation that lays out basic parameters. The state planning office, or whatever they're called now, I forget what, strategic initiatives, I don't know what they're called, I have no
Office
idea.
of Planning
But
and
the
Development.
state planning office, you know, a model ordinance. And also, everybody wants you to come. Exeter wants you. Durham, we want you. So, you know, great work. And I think this and future ones you do will be very profitable while doing well while doing good. Yeah, so thank you.
It's an underrated point, Michael, that one of the awesome things for me selfishly, and probably for George too, is that when towns do these really awesome things, like I find myself constantly talking about the gateway mixed use ordinance in Portsmouth, and Exeter's MUND, and everything that Dover has done, and now what Maggie and John are doing, is that now I've got a great example that I can point to and say, this is what this community did and it worked really well. And that's super helpful when I'm having conversations with other communities. But my takeaway from the first part of your comment was that there are creative and beautiful and wonderful things that we can do, but we have to allow that as a municipality and work with the developer to make that happen. And that's exactly what Dover did.
Tying it into Michael, I mean, we built a 7-unit building in Durham that's more of an apartment building style because the land restrictions and 100 feet water setbacks and everything else. We got a chance to open up the model a little bit more in Dover, and we're hoping to reward Dover for taking that leap of faith with us, that we're going to produce something that they can be proud of also. And now we're out searching for that step that we can build a larger complex that can bring childcare in, can bring renewable energy in, can look at ride shares with companies, all the things that we're going to have to do a little bit smarter to do this. And we continue to hear stories from Novel Ironworks and all the other companies in the area that are bringing people from Lawrence, Mass, and Brunswick, Maine, and they're vanning people in 2 hours away just to get through these things and stuff like that. If you listen to these companies, they're bringing people from 1 to 2 hours away. I got a call from someone recently. They were talking about wanting to teach, English to some people and everything else. I said, great, just put it in the van, and by the time they get 4 hours a day, they'll get out of the van and speak English fluently at the end of the trip. 4 hours a day of English. Who wouldn't want to do that and everything? But we're going to have to get creative in our communities. We're willing to fit it in. Maggie's very, very smart on working with town planners and sitting down and saying, what is your community? What will they embrace? We're willing to invest, partner with companies and invest. We're proud of the fact that we don't make money up front on this. We're not pulling a salary. We're not doing these things. We're in a situation where we can put our time and energy into this and partner with good companies and everything else. We feel if you bring young men and women to this area or keep them in this area, everybody benefits. Our Harmony Homes benefits. Everybody benefits. So we're not in any competition. There's plenty of units to build.
Yeah. There have been a couple questions from our Zoom audience that might be a little bit outside of the purview of this panel, and not to put Ryan on the spot, but you might be able to speak to some of this. A little bit about supportive housing for folks with developmental disabilities. There was a question about rooming houses specifically, and Rockingham County's need for rooming houses, and so that might be a question for Doug. And Ryan, a little bit about housing choice vouchers and if there has been some consideration and discussion, which there certainly has, again, a little bit outside of the purview of sort of this conversation and our panelists, but the need for landlords to accept housing choice vouchers because of how drastic that problem's gotten.
Yeah. So when it comes to, and I'm speaking with my Fairtide hat on now, Fairtide is an organization in Kittery. We provide ongoing supportive housing services to people coming out of homelessness. So the kind of niche that we serve is, you spoke about Willow Verlo and Crossroads. Crossroads has a waiting list, and there are still a lot of homeless folks out there. So what ends up happening is there are homeless people living in camps, living in their cars, paycheck to paycheck, something happens, and they're on the street. And they can't get into Crossroads or other emergency shelters because there's no outlet for them once they get there. And that comes down to the housing choice voucher issue. So what we're finding is, just as a general affordability issue, is when market rate is as high as it is, and when there are so many applicants, landlords are not willing to accept housing choice vouchers. So a big issue that we try to address as Fairtide is engaging with landlords to try to sweeten the pot a little bit. Provide them with guaranteed rent, provide them with a reserve loss fund, provide vacancy coverage while we try to place someone. But it becomes more and more difficult as time goes. So what you guys are doing is great because it provides units. And whether or not you're kind of taking folks from Fairtide or directly from Crossroads, you're providing additional availability to potentially free up units that our folks can find a home in. Yeah. So it's a different aspect of the affordability, but it's all part of this bigger problem that we're seeing. So if any of you are landlords on Zoom or in the audience and are interested in talking to me about our landlord engagement incentives through Fairtide, please let me know, because we're always looking for landlord partners or people to kind of share that story.
Thanks, Ryan. Surprise panelist. Doug, did you want to speak at all to the question about rooming houses?
This wasn't a job description when he came. I told him, hey, man, let's go together. He didn't know he was going to be in front of people. So.
Yeah, I would have dressed up a little more appropriately. Brought my running shorts for dinner.
Yeah, don't stop.
First, I'd like to talk to about the Seacoast Family Promise. I'm not sure if anybody's ever heard of this organization. And I have to pat myself on the back for bringing them into Exeter because it was a little bit of a battle because the people around in the neighborhood kind of felt like they didn't know what it was, but I did, and fought very hard to get them into Exeter. They have expanded. They've bought a couple of properties, and we have some really good people that are supporting, and it's exactly that people don't have a place to live because they lost their jobs or whatever. But the Seacoast Family Promise is a good organization, and it's really suppressed the people around them that they realize now what a good cause it is, and it's working out really well. So, and I think it's probably the same
Yep. Yeah, they're very much a sister organization of Fairtide. So we have actually placed some of our clientele with Seacoast Family Promise. But like Fairtide, we have a house right in Kittery Fourside. Yeah. It's a big old 5-unit, and we always joke that no one knows where it is, and they shouldn't, and they don't. It's folks who've come out of homelessness who are community members and who are no different than anyone else. So dispelling those myths.
Yes, exactly.
And providing
that was the difficult part. And
it's really hard.
It was hard. It went on for a year, for our zoning, but it's worked out really well. They've actually purchased another building next to them in Exeter on Hampton Road and converted it into condos. And they own the condos, but then they allow the people to live there. So boarding houses, we do allow boarding houses by special exception in Exeter. We do have one or two, but nobody's ever come forward to do another one.
Okay.
I'm not saying, the ones are grandfathered that are there now, but we do allow boarding houses
Yeah.
in town by special exception. So I guess somebody could bring that in. And there's a lot of density there too, I believe, so
Great.
another option. And I think, we all do a good job at doing what we're doing, but once again, it always starts at the top. And the top is in Concord. You need, as you talked about, John, the regulations on, DES and all the other organizations. I think they need to look at this as well to allow, not get so restrictive that it stops you from doing your project, so.
Yeah. Doug, thanks so much. Unfortunately, it's 10:03, and I know the Dover Chamber loves to be extremely punctual. So we're going to let you all go. I want to say thank you again to all of you who are here in person. Thank you to everyone who joined us on Zoom. Sorry, I don't know where to look to make eye contact with you. Thank you, of course, to our presenting sponsor, Cambridge Trust, and they were not particularly rowdy back there. So, and thank you, of course, to the Seacoast Chamber Alliance, our sort of partner in making this summit happen every year. This was another great one, and I've very much enjoyed talking with all of you today, our panelists. Thank you so much, Darren and Maggie and John and Ryan.
Surprise
And
panelist.
Doug, our other surprise panelist, who answered a good deal of the questions this morning. So thank you all, and stay and chit chat and ask our panelists your specific questions if you have any sort of lingering questions.
Nice job, Sarah.